So let's have a look at some of the questions we've got here. Has anyone seen any design patterns or motifs in 1 Samuel? Nath?
Yeah, you start off with another lady who can't have kids. We've seen that.
Okay. So what generally happens when there's a lady who can't have kids? Yeah, they have kids. That's right. But like, what's
first there's a promise?
Okay, yeah, right. All right. So remember from Genesis, we're still looking for the way God's going to redeem the whole world through Israel. And so we're still looking for this person that's going to turn up. And it seems that every time there's a barren woman, God chooses to bless her womb, and then she gives birth to someone who we all think, oh, maybe this is the one. Okay, so we saw that with Naomi, and who was her son? Hannah. Did I say Naomi? Yeah. This is going to happen more than once tonight. Samuel, yes, okay. It's like, wow. Samuel, and we'll talk about it, he becomes he holds multiple offices. Well, maybe this guy could be the man. Okay, that's good. What else? Did anyone see anything else like rear of Tugly head? Rod?
Yeah, Samuel had the Nazarite vow and no razor would be on his head. So that
okay.
Before.
So who else has been a Nazarite that we're aware of? Samson. Good. All right. Yeah. Okay. Was he a good Nazarite? As far as like sticking to the Nazarite standards? No, not really. Because you're not allowed to cut your hair. And he told his missus, well, you can get that sorted out. Well, I guess he didn't want to do that. But you're not allowed to touch dead bodies. And he just loved killing them. So I don't know, he probably would have had a bit of dead body on him at some point. Okay.
Andy,
yes.
Is the Nazarite thing, is that something that people chose, like they elected? Is that like you didn't have to come from a particular line to be a Nazarite?
I've really got no idea. I'm going to guess a prophet would have received a word from the Lord and said, your son is going to be. Yeah. Could have been a vow there. Leviticus is where we'll find out about. No, it's Numbers. Pretty sure it's Numbers where we find out about. We don't know much about the whole deal, to be honest. But anyway. Yeah, sorry, I can't have you. Anything else? Any other like repeated phrases, motifs, design patterns in the story?
Eli and Samuel were faithful, but their kids weren't.
Really? Doesn't that just time and again? Every time it's like, okay, here's a good one. Oh, kids are crap. And I don't know, that there may be some sort of natural law there as well, I don't know, but I've heard people teach on it as if that's what the stories are trying to communicate. You know, men and women of influence, be careful that you don't do it at the cost of your family. I'm not sure that's exactly what the stories are explicitly trying to communicate, but certainly there is that implicit idea that people who, whether they're in ministry or not, who have a particular capacity, if they don't keep it in check, are much more likely to, run off doing 100 hours a week in whatever it is that isn't their family, and as a result, kids get bitter and don't follow suit.
What about obedience to God's word as opposed to disobedience?
Yes. Okay. So that's particularly helpful in light of, like, there's a set of lenses that we're meant to be viewing these historical books through at the moment. The lenses of the law of Moses. Remember, there's a law that's been set out, and so when we weigh the behaviour of these people, we weigh it against the standards that were set in that law. And in chapter 28, we've gone back to it numerous times of Deuteronomy, where that law is repeated from where it was originally presented in Exodus, has a big list of like all the blessings that come from obedience, and then a big list of all the curses that come from disobedience.
And the word of the Lord was rare.
Yes?
Before Samuel, but then it talked a lot about God's word to Samuel, and he didn't let any words fall to the ground, and he spread the word to Israelites.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Eli wasn't listening, but Samuel was.
Yeah. Did anyone else not listen, but then somebody else did?
Yeah. Saul.
Yeah, Saul and David. Okay. So you were seeing these literary designs in the story, and they help educate us that the author is trying to speak to us through these particular stories in certain ways. And so these aren't just like, good anecdotal sort of stories to not just, and I don't mean that they're not also, but they're not just, Sunday school stories that encourage us to live like Samuel or to live like David as opposed to Eli's or his sons or Saul. Good? Okay? What about some specific themes or theological themes that you've drawn from the text?
On that video, it says that God opposes the proud.
Yes.
Humble.
Okay, so now this is going to be a big part of our conversation tonight. I assume, is that there's that.
I think in the video it says that God opposes the proud and lifts up the humble.
Yeah.
It seemed to happen.
So we've got to try and discern now. Does God actively oppose? Like does he willingly bring about malevolent circumstances? I'm reluctant to say evil, but maybe that's an easier word. Evil circumstances for the sake of his good, like in opposition to people. Does his hand literally turn against people? We heard Naomi talk about that in Ruth, like God's hand was turned against me. Is that a real thing? Is that a theme that we can? Is that a God theme? Is that the way God behaves? Or is that just like an ancient Israelite understanding of how it is that circumstances that turn bad, to be able to maintain the idea of a sovereign God, then you must also say, well, because of my bad circumstances, ultimately God's in control, and so I can sort of pin it on Him because He's the full stop. Because this is important. This is where theology becomes really important. Because how we perceive God to behave for us or against us in these books is going to directly impact on how we believe God, sort of behaves in our life, in our covenant context right now. Yes, Matt?
Didn't we talk about it at some point about, that it can be, some of these things can be viewed as an act of God's graciousness?
Okay, so where did we talk about that? Yes. Yes. Excellent. So can you inform us, was that you, Dave? Can you tell us a bit more about the cycle of apostasy?
God sort of let people do what they want to show them that their ways are great, which puts them in a bad situation, which then turns them back to God.
Okay. All right. Okay. So now the way you phrased that, you've given a good description of this cycle of apostasy, but you've chosen, I don't know if you've chosen, but you've phrased it in a certain way that I would say takes the heat off God and puts the heat on people as far as their oppression goes. So what do I mean by that? Dave said that, well, he lets people behave the way they want and it sort of becomes self-evident. Oh, what we're doing here is really wrong and stupid. God, we need you. But it could also be argued from the text that because, like God's anger burned against Israel, we could say, no, because of their sin, God actively jumped into their circumstances and made it bad so that they wouldn't continue in their sin and then they would turn to Him. Now, it might be nuanced, but can you see the difference? And that is a pretty significant difference when you get a little bit further down the track. And this is a similar question now. I don't even know where we started with this. I think it was Jacqueline, was it? No? No. Oh.
It could also, is there something always there in between two where it's actually like when, you're living and God is your shield, He's protecting you from what goes on.
Yeah.
And does He kind of just move His shield to the side? Do you know what I mean? Like He's kind of not inventing this stuff, He's just kind of moves to the side and lets it come through and goes, sure, do you feel it easy?
That is a great analogy. Yes. So, as Christians, we're all under God's shield. If we misbehave, does He shift the shield of protection so that we sort of bear the consequences? Or is our misbehaviour stepping out from underneath the shield of protection?
Yes. Undercover.
I feel like Saul
Yeah, that is very
early acted against God's will, but he still continued to rise. And a friend of mine shared on Facebook earlier this week about thoughts that you have sort of
those circumstances come into your life. So I sort of feel like that's really what happened. Saul started to think in these ways, and that's when he was well and truly out of God's, the centre of God's will.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thanks.
There's a passage in here that says that he struck the men of Beth Shemesh because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. He, God, struck 50,070 men of the people, and the people lamented because the Lord struck the people with a great slaughter.
Okay, so now we're taking it to the next level. It's not whether or not the Christian's poor behaviour is stepping out from underneath the shield. It's not whether or not the Christian's poor behaviour is God shifting the shield. It's the Christian's poor behaviour, God lifting up the shield and going, boom!
It's not just the Christians either. He used the Israelites as his stick,
As his fist.
his big hammer,
Yes.
against all the Canaanites.
Yep.
And later on, he'll use the Assyrians as his hammer to hit the Israelites.
Yeah.
And Babylonians.
It's just like the hard and soft
Just like, can you enlighten us? Okay. Well, yeah, I think definitely at the very least there is some both ends, because we do know just from our own personal experience, if you behave poorly, there are some natural consequences that, as a result of those natural consequences of your sinful actions, you go, oh, okay, that was silly. But then there are other times we know where we will behave, reprehensibly, and apparently we get away with it. There's no direct sort of negative consequence. Maybe that's perceivable, but I don't know. Maybe not everyone has had the same experience. Probably not one that you'd want to share, even if you had to have the experience. But there have been times, I would say, in the life of Christians where how would I put it? Maybe God's tipped somebody else off to your poor behaviour, and you might have got the tap on the shoulder from them. It's like, well, that's God sort of meddling in your life. Meddling's not the right word, because I believe He's a good and gracious God.
But sometimes he can deal with the actual situation very directly.
Well, okay, certainly there are, yes, but so the question that we're asking though is what is written in our book the result of the author's perception of how God behaved? So he saw that 50,000 people were struck dead, and he went, well, God's sovereign, obviously they've done something wrong, and so he wrote, well, here's what they did wrong, and this is the result.
Even the Red Sea crossing, God pulled off it's like he came down and pulled the chariot wheels off.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's hard to get away from. I'm trying to be as sympathetic as I can to the idea that God is not the one doing the hammer work. But I think He is the one doing the hammer work.
But sometimes He uses different means, and other times He just directly does it Himself.
Yeah.
Isn't that more like an indication of, God's a really great parent? Like when you see parents, they use all sorts of different things, different situations, but different children.
And the more children understand and grow in their maturity and understanding of being an adult and being a child of their parent, that directly impacts on how the parent parents as well. And I think we've talked about that concept here in class, about the idea that the idea of reciprocity, that being that if you do good, you get good, if you do bad, you get bad, is something we all do to our little children. That's not how we behave with our adult children. Because they've grown in their maturity and understanding of good and bad, and so there's a level of trust that has been built, there's a level of intimacy that has been built, so that if your adult child does something bad and they're suffering the consequences of it, usually a good parent will say, okay, come into my arms for some love, because you're mature and you know what's happened here, and you're already repentant. But a 3-year-old doesn't know that pulling the hair of their older sister is bad, so you need to give them a smack and say no for this. So that's probably, I think, what is going on here. And because we live in the New Covenant, the argument would be we have a far greater and deeper understanding of who God is and how He relates to humanity, so that we should not expect that because we have worshipped some idol, that He's going to come through and set LT on fire. Now you might think, well, we're not going to worship idols. Well, rude shock, wake up, yes we do. Like every time we don't obey God, we're worshipping some idol, whether it's ourselves or our happiness or our pride or somebody else, the idol worship of man, like the approval of others, all that kind of thing. It's the same thing ultimately. And so we shouldn't expect that God's going to come through here and burn things up. I don't know. That's teaching, and it's probably me saying too much because I don't really know. These are questions that we all have to work out for ourselves and as a community. But there we go. That is a really good thing. Thank you, Mags, for starting that one. And we should touch on that as we get through the content tonight. Okay, what about this question here? With respect to that which is being revealed about God from Genesis to Ruth, what new things are we learning about God?
He let them have a king.
Okay, so God's okay with now. All right, that's a great one. Actually, good example. So God is okay with the king. He wants a king. He what?
No.
He listens.
Well, he did because Jesus was going to be king.
Okay.
There had to be a king.
Yeah.
Jesus was always going to be king, wasn't he?
And is this necessarily a brand new revelation? Has there been anything that we've read thus far that would indicate that there might be a king in Israel?
Yes.
The Judah promise?
Oh, yeah, good one. Well, that's actually more, your mum's already picked up on that, so that's cheating. She's already basically said the Messiah will be king.
I've elaborated it in a more contextual way.
So Nathan's referring to the prophecy that came from Jacob to his son Judah, that from your line one will rise up who's from, how does this get phrased? The scepter will never depart from his hand, yeah, something like that. Yes?
There was no king in the Judges. It said there was no king of Israel.
Oh, yeah. So there's another place where it's like there's an indication that, okay, kings are coming. Has God mandated anything around kings?
Don't have multiple wives. No, he said that in like the law stuff. When you have a king, make sure they don't have multiple wives.
Okay, good. Okay, so I think Deuteronomy 22, we've got some laws for how the king should behave.
Oh, yeah.
That's interesting, isn't it? He didn't want a king, but he sort of was like, what these guys are like, so better give them some laws while we're at it. Okay. Anything else that we've learned about? Any new things? Yeah, Rob?
God speaks to kids.
God speaks to kids. What about when you're in church and everyone's praying and they're running up and down the aisles yelling? Maybe that's God speaking to us through kids. Okay, so this is a new revelation. This is a serious comment. I understand. I made light of it. Sorry, but like, come on, let's put ourselves in the context of ancient Israelite. Like, what are kids?
Economic value.
Yeah, they're commodity, sort of.
Future investments,
Yep.
retirement fund.
Insurance policy, yep. Social welfare, or personal welfare, really. Yep. So they're your old folks' home. Yep. I can't remember where I heard it now, but I have a feeling it would have been Jordan Peterson talking about, I think he was just talking about infant mortality in developing countries and how that has improved vastly over the past 15 years. But he made a comment that in some of his research he had done in partnership with the UN, that they discovered that one of the reasons that people have so many kids in developing countries is not just a lack of contraception, but to try and shore up some kind of future, because the infant mortality rate, up until recently has been so high. Yeah. So like we make the joke sometimes when people have like 3 or 4 or 5 kids, which might be a lot in our context, like, you're scared you're going to lose one or something. Or maybe you haven't made that joke. I certainly would never make a joke like that. But yeah, that's like a reality for some people. Like, if I don't have a son, what hope do I have when I'm too old to, take myself to the toilet or whatever? Who's going to look after me? Who's going to provide for me? Okay, so kids are important now. Kids aren't just a commodity, and they're not just important because of what they can do for you. It's like there's some divine dignity afforded to children. Now, don't answer this, Rob. Why would Rob say that? Where do we get this indication from? Samuel. Yeah, and what in particular? Yes. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So little Samuel thought Eli was yelling at him while he was asleep, but it wasn't. It was God speaking specifically to him. Now let's make it even more significant. What did God trust Samuel with?
He was going to judge Eli.
It's saying, get the little kid. He's not just saying, Samuel, I'm God. He's like, Samuel, here's what's going to go down. Imagine being a kid, just like your first encounter with God. Whoa. Yes.
How old was he?
I don't know. I don't have a guess.
9.
He wasn't 42. Well, I think we've got there's a safe space. He was weaned or he was nursed or whatever. So what is that? 3? I don't know. So I'm just guessing. Okay, 7. Okay, and then you become an adult at 13 or 12 as a Jewish boy. 13. Okay, so somewhere between 8 and 12. Yeah. So little fun. Yeah.
Eli's reaction to that I find amazing. But he's like, okay, right, carry on. Like, just like, that's amazing.
Okay, so is everyone up to speed with the story that we're talking about here?
Yeah.
Okay.
He already knew that he already knew that.
Yes, I have a feeling that Eli was like pretty ticked off to it. Like, you can only live conscious of rebellious sin for so long before you kind of go, my time is kind of up here.
And do you think there's like maybe some even like irony in that his reprimand is sort of based on like about his kids and that it was like a kid that sort of told him off about it?
That's good. Yeah. Yep, I don't know. I never thought of that. That's great. Okay, now, something I should mention. When we discover something like that, or we think we discover something like that, what we've really got to be careful not to do is go, irony. That means there's something in that. There's 100% there's something in that. That's a risk because you start to read things into the Bible. But on the other side, we can't see things like that and then ignore it. That's part of the literary genius. The authors and editors have put things in there to make us stop and think and then ponder for deeper insights. And Rob prayed that we would be able to draw out, or that the Lord would reveal new treasures to us tonight. So, Amber, that's fantastic. Now we can't just go past it, we go home and think about it.
There is that scripture, out of the mouth of babes.
That's a scripture, is it? No,
Out of the mouth of
doesn't
babes.
surprise me. A lot of our idioms are scripture. So, do you know where it's from?
Oh, brilliant.
And nobody noticed that you could have said anything and we'd all be like, whoa, that's impressive. Tom, can you fact check that, please? No, don't. Trust me. Okay. I doubt it, given that you've been right every other time. That's good.
That's good, isn't it?
Okay. Well, let's get moving. So we've been working with this sort of paradigm. Israel's prehistory for the first 12 chapters of Genesis, or 11 chapters of Genesis. Israel family, they were our patriarchs that took, they were Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and probably Joseph. And then under the leadership of the prophets, this is a bit confusing, this term, but in the Jewish tradition, not so much, where we have our Old Testament books categorized into history books and then major and minor prophets. It's a little bit the other way around with the Jewish Bible, because their prophets are Moses and Joshua and the Judges, because they were the sort of prophetic leaders of Israel. And so the books that were written about them are a prophetic warning to the humanity, basically. So under the rulership of the prophets, we were reading books like Exodus, or back end of, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. But now we're coming into this period of history at around about 1000 BC, where Israel is led by kings. And just to keep up with the alliteration, David Pawson uses princes. So he'll say prehistory, patriarchs, prophets, princes, and then the priestly rule, a time where Israel didn't live in the land. They lived out in in Babylon under the rulership of priests. They had no king, there were no prophets. The priests were ruling the roost, and even up until when they went back to Israel for the second time. Okay, so this is the period of history that we're in. Israel is now becoming a nation. They've moved from a loose confederation of 12 tribes, and they've started to organise as a nation underneath the leadership of Saul and Samuel. So, to break down the two books, because remember it's just really one book, but the English Bible has it separated into two. We've got the link from Judges, the rulership of the judges to the kings. Then we've got sort of Saul's rise and fall, and David's sort of initial part of his rise. And then we've got David, who actually, rises to the king of Judah, the king of Israel, and then his demise as well. So that's the outline that we're going to be following, and we're just going to be covering the content from 1 Samuel. So Samuel 1 to 31 this week, and then we'll start off with the content of Samuel 2 next week, and then we'll talk about the themes a little bit more then. So the book kicking off again with the story of, a mother with a barren womb. She was also one of two wives. So another story there where through a polygamous relationship, God is still happy to work. She prays, God blesses her, and as a result, she says to God, well, listen, the son that you've blessed me with, I'm going to put him in the care of Eli the priest at the tabernacle. And so Samuel there, that's where he has that encounter with God. And we learn all about Eli's subpar performance as a father, mostly, more than a priest. But Eli still has something to contribute as we move into chapters 4 to 7. We've got Israel. It's not long after the period of the Judges that this is all taking place. And what did we learn in those last couple of chapters of the periods of the Judges as far as their concept of religion or Yahweh worship? There was a lot of self-worship, because they seemed to think that they could just do whatever they thought was right in their own eyes. But as a result of that kind of thinking, remember there was the story about the nature of the Israelite religion. It had to do with Micah and the Danites.
Didn't it get blurred and stuff?
Yeah, their religion had just gotten totally mixed up with the idol worship of the Canaanites, and so they're making their own little idols, and they've got Yahweh or Israelite priests who are sort of buying and selling their services like a pagan priest would, and it's they've just completely lost sight of who Yahweh is. And so we get a story here where Israel foolishly decides to take the Ark of the Covenant, which we know from its prominent place in the tabernacle is meant to be the symbol of what? God's presence. Excellent. Okay. And so they're starting to treat God superstitiously almost. It's we can. The ark is is God, emblematic of God, and so all of a sudden God is not personal and God is material, and so it sort of becomes an it. The word it gets used at the latter part of this story in chapter 4, and so Israel are thinking if we take it with us, we're gonna be blessed, as if we can turn our fortunes with our concepts and behaviours, not listening to God. Well, anyway, the Ark of the Covenant gets captured by the Philistines, and when Eli, we hear about the story, when Eli hears about this, he's a big boy, and he rolls off his seat and breaks his neck, which is a sad end to what is a pretty sad story for Eli, because we know again about his sons. Anyway, the Philistines, they set the ark up because they think, oh yes, wow, we've got that awesome God from the Israelites. We know about this God because he's the God that got them out of Egypt. And the story gets repeated time and time again. We really should be able to be picking up on this. Every time we hear anyone retell the story of what God has done, that's telling us something about our God and something about the unique nature of our God, Nathan.
It also says that Israelites' enemies remember God's reputation and fear him a good deal more than certain people do.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, there's probably something in that for us too. Okay, but as a result, the Philistines, they just sort of bring upon themselves curses. Now, this is one of those things where it's tricky. We're trying to discern between those superstitious beliefs and how God is actually behaving. Up here, I'm saying that in and of itself, the Ark of the Covenant is just a bit of gold and timber. But they're treating it like it's something more than it is. And so it's still just a bit of gold and timber when it sits in front of Dagon, the Philistine god, which is just a rock. But because God is trying to communicate something, then his presence does come in sort of judgment. And so when we read these stories, it can be a bit hard to discern, like, well, is the Ark of the Covenant, like, is there something special about it, or is there not? And we've got to understand that it's not the Ark of the Covenant that's causing the Philistines to, their God to fall on its face and for all the plagues to come upon them, but it's actually God trying to say something quite clearly to the Philistines. So they get over it and they say, well, here's what we'll do. If this Israelite God is, really a God, we'll throw this Ark of the Covenant on the back of a trolley and attach it to some cows and we'll see what happens to it. And the cows make a beeline for Jerusalem. And they're like, oh, okay, it must be their God. I shouldn't say Jerusalem because it's not Jerusalem. It's Shiloh, isn't it?
And they leave their
Yes.
calves behind too. No cow would leave its calf behind.
Oh, right. There's that little detail there. That's right. Yeah. Yes. So what do they call it when a cow moves? A mooing cow. A mooing calf. Yeah.
It's lowing.
Lowing. Is that what it is? Yes. A lowing calf. Yes. Calls its mother home. And despite the fact in the natural that cow would be compelled to come home, instinctively, we can see God's hand providentially moving, and the ark heading back up to. Oh, okay, of course. It's not in Shiloh yet. It goes to this particular place, Kiriath, whatever it is. It stays there for 20 years, and that's important because they forget about that for a moment. Okay, so moving along, we have Samuel. He fulfills the role now of priest, prophet, and judge over Israel. Now, remember, Samuel's the child from Hannah who had the barren womb. And up until this point, wherever we've seen a child born in these circumstances, we are very excited. Oh, maybe this is the Redeemer. Maybe this is the Saviour. Maybe this is the Deliverer that's going to set the world right. But each time one of those has come to the fore, they come to the fore under really only one title, whether it be of some kind of political influence, like Joseph, yes, or some patriarchal influence, like Isaac maybe, prophets and judges also, but it's the first time here where we actually see someone that manages to sort of carry the torch for three different categories: priest, prophet, and judge, which is the foreshadow for something, which is Jesus. Yeah. Okay, so he does ultimately fulfill all that and more. Okay, when he is old, what have I written there? Samuel tried to install his sons as judges over Israel. Oh, that's right. So here we have another story of man trying to do their own thing. But the people rejected them, demanding that they get themselves a king. And it's at this point that we have this dialogue between Samuel and God. And Samuel's pretty dejected. And God's like, well, mate, get over yourself because it's not you they're really rejecting, it's me. But as I said, Deuteronomy 22, which is what I told you guys, it's chapter 17, God has already sort of catered for this particular instance. But God's not happy with it. He wants Israel to be working under a theocracy, which is the idea that God is the ruler and everyone is subject to God. And for that to happen, everyone must be in relationship with God, and we know that that's certainly not where Israel was at this point. And so, in approving a king, God makes sure that the king realises that he is vice-regent. He is not the ultimate authority, but that he would be subject to God. And to be able to maintain subjection to God, the king was never to operate in autonomy. He always had to have the priest walking alongside him, or the prophet walking alongside him, to be able to give him some kind of spiritual guidance. Okay. So Samuel did say to the people, hey, listen, look, if you want a king, we can do it, but you're not going to like it, because he's going to conscript your sons, and he's going to tax you heavily, and he's going to enslave some of you guys. So, you sure you want to do this? And they're like, yep. Now, I can't really not mention, what happened over the weekend. So, what have I want to say?
Frank doesn't want to talk about the Roosters.
Yeah. So we did, actually, you were here late, we did praise God for what he had done this weekend with the Broncos. And we will continue to praise the Lord as we sing Bronx up into the top 4. And the continual demise of the Roosters. No. Obviously, the ScoMo thing, there are a lot of people that are very excited, and there are probably a lot of people that aren't as excited. And I think it's important as Christians for us to understand that while it's a really encouraging thing to think that Australia has voted in someone who's quite openly, a man of faith, that we don't immediately assume that because someone wears the title of Christian that they are in any way, shape or form more fit to lead the country than somebody else. Now, obviously, we would like to think that someone who has a personal relationship with the Lord, they would be doing, a better job than somebody who has no connection to God. But ScoMo, while he's a Christian, is part of a political party, and so we must continue to pray for our leaders, irrespective of what party they are. And we've also got to keep in mind that had ScoMo not been elected, that God is he's sovereign. He chooses whoever leads any country. And so while there may be some excitement for some, and I'm not assuming just because some Christians are excited by this, that everyone in the room is excited by this. By no means think that that's the case. But I would just be cautioning anyone who might be thinking that just because ScoMo's got in, that, all of a sudden it's, we're going back to the years of Christendom, and that Australia is, there is a political party with policies that are quite, what would you call it, anti-Christian, maybe as well. So personally, I'm stoked that we've got ScoMo in there, but it's just important to understand that whenever we have someone ruling over us, not that he's a king, that unless they are directly subject to God and then able to operate only answerable to God, then we don't really have Christian leadership. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
It wasn't a weekend because I was very troubled by all of that, but I was thinking of that, which could be totally wrong, but that bit in Joshua, where Joshua says, are you on our side? Ask the angel of the Lord.
Yeah.
He said, are you on our side or on their side? And you expect this answer of well, I'm totally not going to get neither.
Yes.
And for me, it just I just kept thinking of that. I just thinking, we don't know. It's really.
Okay, so Joshua walks into the promised land and he sees the angel of the Lord, who could be God, it could be Jesus, we don't know, we talked about that. I don't know, did you watch the Bible Project video on it? Yeah. And Joshua is quick to go to the angel of the Lord and say, look, are you on our side? And he just goes, no. Are you on our side or are you on their side? And he just said, no. And he's telling him something, it's got nothing to do with you and everything to do with me. Whose side are you on? Now, this is an important thing, I think also, maybe we're getting off topic here a moment, but say if you've got the title of leader, you've been given the title, ScoMo's been given the title leader, then the fact that he's a Christian, we could assume, great, there's going to be filtering down of Christian leadership. But I'm wondering how much a title really influences people, and whether or not we actually have a leader. Okay, and it's someone who is actually a leader, independent of their title. So a church could be maybe a better example. You've got people who are given leadership roles, and then we say, well, we hope they're a really good Christian person because they're going to have massive influence. How much more influence would they have than someone who is actually just a natural leader and is a Christian, living obediently before the Lord? And what would you prefer? And I think maybe just that. I don't know, maybe different cultures are different, but the title, while we're encouraged to live submissively before our our leaders and our elected leaders, and so we should, I'm more encouraged by just Christians who stand up and actually take some kind of leadership. And so whether or not our titled leader is a Christian or not, I'm not too worried about that. I just want to see heaps of Christians who are actually leaders. Are you picking up what I'm trying to say here? Like, this should be an encouragement to the church, just irrespective of what your title is, to go and lead the community. This is actually Proverbs 19, the whole where there is no vision, the people will perish. And people use that as some kind of vision casting slogan for their church. It's like, let's get a vision and we're going to be a massive church. When really it actually says where a community can't see a good picture of God, then that community will fall apart. Now, we're seeing that happen in our society. There is no good picture of, well, there are probably, but the media certainly aren't portraying a really good picture of God. So it's up to us. Let's not rely on mainstream media. Let's go and be leaders in our community and on every level. Okay. You can interact and you can push back and you can say, stop, it's silly, or I've got something to add. Okay. All right, now, Samuel anoints Saul, who on the one hand looks, every bit the leader with the big broad shoulders, standing head and shoulders above everybody else, and he's really good looking, and it's kind of encouraging because Saul, the Benjamite, says, "Look, we're in a little puny tribe. Are you serious? You want me to be king?" It's like, wow, this guy might have an element of humility here. This is really exciting. And then we read that the Spirit of the Lord comes on Saul. Now, this phrase actually influences how we perceive that whole analogy of shield on and shield off that we were talking about before. Because we learn that what we were hoping for in Saul is this, potentially humble leader, who's not true at all, very proud. And so God actively removes his spirit. So is that like lifting the shield off or something like that? Which, again, got to caution. So that's not how we operate now under the new covenant. Once the indwelling spirit is there, God's not going to pull it off. Nothing can remove us from that love of God. Okay, so where do we go down here? Okay, we've talked about that, and then also we've talked about this also. Israel's king was to serve as vice-regent with God. And so again, to be able to do that, Saul needed to be submissive also to Samuel. He wasn't just to go and do his own thing. Okay, well, we thought he was going to be good, and he has a bit of military success, but all of a sudden that goes to his head. Now, I think this is, is there anything in this revelation about his behaviour that might be applicable?
Well, it's a fulfillment of the warning.
Yeah, okay, yep. It's a fulfillment of the warning that you're not going to like this when a king gets in. It's that whole idea of like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But I'm thinking when we look at Saul as the humble guy, we make an assumption. Look, he's going to be a good guy. He's going to be tops. There's two risks. There is a risk with someone who is not prepared for leadership that they may express some kind of humility because they're genuinely surprised that they would be picked or chosen. But if someone is not mature and prepared, the risk is that they'll definitely become arrogant. He's this good-looking guy from Benjamin who never expected it, so he was never prepared for it. And then all of a sudden he gets a bit of military success, not because of anything that he's done, mind you, but because of this. The Spirit of the Lord came on him. And all of a sudden he thinks he's all that and a little bit more. And he displays his behaviour by usurping the role of Samuel. And so how does he do that? Do you remember that particular story?
He doesn't sacrifice.
Okay, so the idea is that the priests, the Levites, are to be the ones actually doing the sacrifices, and before a battle, or was it after a battle? I think it was before the battle. That's right. Saul wanted to go out into battle, and he's like, "Where's Samuel? Where is he? Forget him. I'll do the sacrifice. Let's get this thing going." And so immediately there we see a picture of his arrogance, assuming that as king, I can do it. Sorry, Sylvie.
But I saw that a bit differently. I know everybody says that, but actually, not 2/3 of his army left. I think he was desperate. I think he didn't trust God enough that he can conquer anybody, even if everybody's gone, because they were running off, and that is the reason why he did the sacrifice.
Yeah.
You know, and to be honest, when I read that, I'm like, how often do we take matters in our own hands if we think, oh, where God?
Yeah.
When are you showing up? Like when we try and do things foolishly.
Yeah.
That's.
I mean, I'm totally guilty of being like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I had a conversation with someone, and no one in this room, because I've had this conversation with people in this room as well, but I had that conversation with someone recently just about finding a partner, and they're like, I'm never going to be able to find a partner, and my initial response, in my mind was, if you can trust God, He can find you someone, Not that that's guaranteed ever, anywhere in Scripture, but that He could if he wanted to. But I thought, you know what, no, you couldn't find a partner. You really could, and that's the danger. Like, if you go out there, you'll find someone, eventually, for sure. But you might not find a good one. And there's nothing that suggests that because we're Christians and that we might, choose another Christian, that's a good choice or a good idea. I agree. He hasn't remembered a story. What's a story that Saul could have remembered that might have buoyed him?
Aaron's sons.
Okay, so flippantly entering into that office of priest, that's one, but I'm sort of more talking along the lines of what Sylvia's brought up in that he didn't trust God because his army was running away. Gideon, yes. Yeah, good. Okay, so now this again, though, just going back, I know I've said this 1,000 times, but this is why it's so important that we understand the stories of the Old Testament, because they are real, true evidence, historical facts that say our God behaves a certain way. It's not, that spiritual aphorism as a result of a DMT trip. That someone's like, sweet, I saw God and He is a psychedelic love beast or something, because that's where a lot of mystical religion sort of sits, just in the abstract. This is just real stuff that happened, and Saul could have been able to prevent in mistake number one, and it's kind of like 3 strikes you're out, by going, oh, hold on, we can wait. If God wants this battle won, it'll be won. I think Holger was going to say something.
Just on that arrogant heart,
Mm.
do you think he had the arrogant heart from the beginning and God picked him anyway as the king, or was he really humble at the beginning and handsome person and but over time with all the victories, obviously he's like, and exactly happened obviously to all of us, you're walking away with God, which is in a certain way a success, and the moment you see it's my success, you're trapped in the trap.
Yeah, well, that's it's sort of up for us to decide. It's not made explicit for us. But it does, so when I say, the first question we always ask when we read the stories is, what does this reveal about God? The second question is, what does it reveal about us? And so we can put ourselves in the shoes of Saul. I think this is maybe one of the first tellings of a story that gets told ad nauseum at Hollywood, which is, the humble kid from out west who's, really good at soccer for his local soccer team, goes to the city and he's really humble and he's really quiet, but then he's really good, and all of a sudden he's got all the attention from all the girls, and and so he goes through this period of success in the high school football team or whatever it is, and then he gets really proud and arrogant, and then he has a fall from grace and he realizes all along, I should have been humble, and goes off to have a professional career or something. But it's like this is the kind of the same story, except that it doesn't have the happy ending. It's like, oh, here's the guy with all the potential, but all the potential in the world means zip if you're not doing it in God's strength.
I actually think it's a lot of insecurity because he's the first one where he usurps the role of priest. He's like, oh man, all the people are leaving. I better just do this so we can go ahead with the plan. The second one, he makes the oath, and everyone says, no, you can't kill your son because he broke the oath. So he's like, oh, man, you're right again. So he's insecure there. And then the last one where he failed to follow God's instructions, that's where he says to Samuel, the people said, let's keep these to sacrifice to God. So he just didn't know himself or God, or lots of insecurity there.
Yeah, couple of stories to sort of hold up as a mirror almost. Yeah. Okay, good. Well, we've moved through those other stories just in that one comment. That's really helpful.
Yeah, but also the third point, that's what God then also spoke to me. Like often it's like that. God wants us to do something, and yeah, we do it, but then we only do it half. And because we need a bit of security of ourselves.
Yeah.
It's so it's totally human. And I think it's a good example. Like God wants us to trust fully. It's just he didn't trust God and because of that obey him.
Also, it's a judgment because they wanted him as king and didn't want God to reign over them, and that's the big.
Yes. So the overarching narrative here is that this is what you wanted, this is what you got. But in that, we get these gems, you know, and that's so fear of man, super applicable. But then also fear of not having a little bit of control is there as well. I used to teach surfing, and it would frustrate me that you could get someone all the way there, you know, you could get them through the white waterways that bash on the knees, and you can get them on the surfboard, you can get them out on this, at the alley, maybe this perfect, you know, it's going to go for 200 metres, you're going to have the ride of their life, and you push them onto this wave, and it's like they've done all the hard work, all they've got to do now is get up, and they freak out, and they just hang on, it's like, oh, man. Oh, go away, take the money with you, I don't want to do this, you know, it's like, you've done all the hard. Why would you stop there? And that's been the story of many, you know, sort of Christian testimonies. It's like, why would you stop there? You go and do all the hard stuff, and there's some massive blessing in the corner, and you stifle them. Sorry, yeah, or they get on the knees. Yes, this is Tanisha's problem. Okay, yeah. Okay, all right. And yeah, Rod picks up on this here, but there is a rejection from God there, and that comes by way of His Spirit being actively removed, and then something else being delivered. And this is something that this is caused people issues for a long time. I don't know that we're going to solve it tonight, but I think it's worth having a conversation. So Samuel goes, finds David, anoints him as king, even though he's a little shepherd boy, and we get this awesome line, you know, that God doesn't look at the outward appearance, but looks at the heart. But David doesn't become king immediately. Saul still carries the mantle as king, and in some sort of ironic turn of events, the king to be, who nobody knows is to be the king, ends up being the one who comes to Saul's aid in his time of need. But this tormenting spirit that David's turned up to sort of try and help Saul with, is from God, as far as the text is concerned.
Sure.
So, what do we do with that?
Could that be that in their understanding that the writer didn't know really about the devil and demons and stuff like that? So he thought it's from that because God for sure allowed it.
Yeah. Well, have we heard about tormenting spirits yet?
We've heard about an angel of death with plagues of Egypt, and that was
Where'd that come from?
I mean, that was from but we also had a foreshadowing there where it was like someone hardening their hearts, and then God hardening their hearts. So there's definitely some kind of connection between the human decision and the divine response, but there's still something else going on.
Yep. Amber?
I can't really remember if it was tormented spirit, but when I think it was Sarah, when she was when Abraham made her his sister, and when she'd go on to the ruler replace therein, and then that night he was tormented. I don't know if it was in spirit though. It could have just been.
Yeah. So Pharaoh got bad dreams.
Yeah.
Yep. That's right. He did.
Wow. I actually picked up in Samuel 1:15 because Samuel was correcting Saul because Saul was obeying the people rather than God.
Yep.
And because he's rejected God, his spirit became tormented.
Okay, well, right. So, but this is the question: did his spirit become tormented? or did the Spirit come from God? Because it certainly became tormented.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But as a result of just fear of man, we could all say that, because of the fear of man and how crippling it is, our spirit is tormented. But I don't know that we could all say, a spirit from God has come to torment me.
Well, sometimes in our disobedience, God can send us, and you get tormented about, you knew what you're supposed to do right, you just kept going down in error.
Okay. But can I suggest that that's our conscience. That's our, that might be even maybe conviction from the Spirit. But I'm really trying to sort of press down on the idea that God could have a tormenting spirit at his disposal and then actively send it. And I think Sylvie's done a good job of going, well, that could just, this is one of those things where we read these ancient texts. Are we reading a human's perspective of what God did, or are we reading the divine revelation of what God did?
Well, the other interesting thing that came up with our discussion was that the Lord regretted that he made Saul king over Israel.
Okay, motif.
There's another.
Where have we heard God talking about regret?
The flood.
Yes.
Israelites with Moses.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And then we get a line here. We get a very fascinating line here that in all these things, that God will not change his mind. Yet we know that God changes his mind. Tom's looking at his clock, which means I need to look at my clock.
I don't think there's
So when he says regret, does he really mean I made a mistake? Something like that just makes it so hard for me, because it means like, if I regret something, I mean, it's just never done.
I think he felt sorrow in his heart. It's like a parent trying to discipline the
What can the
child.
argument be? He anyway knows everything, so he knew it's going to happen. So if I regret something, I know it's going to happen.
Still feel sorrow, like Israel.
Well, that's what I'm asking what regret means, if it's a different...
I think Tony might have an answer for you. Holger.
Is it the consequences of his disobedience that the Spirit left him and then God gave him that?
At the very least it is. Yeah. At the very least it is.
It says that Saul was really jealous. He was so jealous all the way through. His jealousy got worse and worse. Maybe he was tormented by a spirit of jealousy.
Yeah.
It's like he just got overcome by all these terrible attitudes too.
So I don't think there's any reason not to just take it at face value and say, okay, God sent the Spirit to torment him. It's not torture, it's just torment.
Wasn't he?
I sort of feel like God's spirits are God's design for us. So I don't feel that it'd be God sending the torment. I think it'd be the spirit of man.
Okay, so this is. I wish we could just do this all night because if we. So I'm going to be extra hard on you guys with the language you're using to try and. No, I don't have the answer, mind you. I just want to get some kind of answer one day, and I don't know that we're going to get it tonight. But the question is, do these scriptures have to fit into what we feel about God, or do these scriptures inform us about God despite how we feel?
It's like asking, is it wrong for God to send a tormenting spirit?
Well, that's the question. That's the question.
If he did it, then no.
Is it in his nature, not is it wrong?
Oh, yes!
What was that?
Okay.
I can say it again.
Okay, so we're talking now about the nature of God. Yes, is it in his nature? And what we're doing here now is we're looking at one little part of a bigger story, which is part of a book, which is only really half of a book, because it's 1 and 2 Samuel, which is part of a way bigger book, which is the whole 66, books. And so we're honing in on something for a moment and forgetting that we need to be able to measure this by what we know of the nature of God. Now this is going to help inform us about the nature of God. And again, I don't have the answer. Don't sit there waiting like, oh yes, he's about to reveal his truth. I don't know. But that's what these stories are doing for us. They're revealing the nature of God. Now, if God can send a tormenting spirit here, it makes God actively sending people to hell, which is another thing we're going to have a problem with next year when you all come back to the New Testament, a bit easier for us to accept, because that is in the nature of God. But if God can't do this kind of thing here, it makes it much harder for us to accept that it's in God's nature to actively send people to hell. And yes.
So God did send that tormenting spirit when his spirit departed from Saul. But the same thing happened with Samson when his hair was cut off.
Yep.
The spirit departed, and then Samson was tormented.
Yes.
I just looked up the definition.
Yes.
I thought that'd be good. And it says torment is severe physical or mental suffering.
Yep.
And so surely you could say that God and Christ, in their nature, is the experience of the cross, which is the most severe form of mental and physical suffering ever experienced. So whether it's in his nature to do it to someone else, but it's definitely part of God's experience of, like he's experienced torment himself.
Okay, so Isaiah 53. Can someone get that up for me quickly, and we'll go to the boys back here, and then we'll talk about what makes us say. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, there's quite a bit in the study notes on this.
Yep.
But in the middle of it, it says Saul's disobedience continued to be punished by the assaults of an evil spirit.
Yes. Okay. So the question, I'm sure, is not whether or not this is a natural thing. It's definitely an evil spirit, and it's. I think it just really boils down to, and this is where both the camps really said, was it allowed by God because He's sovereign, or was it sent by God? And that's really the two camps. Most people say, well, this was something that God allowed to happen because the world is in this constant state of attack from Satan, given to sin. The world is given to sin. Where God doesn't intervene, we should expect these things. And so wherever we're not being tormented by an evil spirit, praise God. That might not be the case. Did someone get Isaiah 53? You got it for us?
Yeah. Right there.
Okay. Okay. Where do I go from? Let's go from halfway through verse 3. A man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. Okay, this is a prophecy about Jesus. Wherever we see him, we assume Jesus. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he had borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God. It wasn't the Jews that put Jesus on the cross, and it wasn't the Romans that put Jesus on the cross.
That's why Jesus cried out, "My God, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
God hung Jesus on the cross for us. Praise God. Break out into freestyle worship as a result of that statement.
You see time and time again that God allows any suffering to further His purposes.
That's right.
Yes, well, let's go back to what Dave picked up with the cycle of apostasy at the start. Look, it's a conversation that I think is helpful, fruitful, but we're not going to get any resolution tonight. We need to move on because we've got about 3 minutes to get through a whole heap of chapters. Just something to help us out, though. In God's nature, Ananias and Sapphira, Acts 5, 2 Corinthians 5, also Paul's told to hand the man who's having sex with his mother-in-law over to the devil, and then also God, it seems, the thorn in Paul's side, which everyone wants to find. What's the thorn in Paul's side? Did he have a limp? Was he blind? No, it was an evil spirit. It says it right there in 2 Corinthians. If you've ever been confused, what is the thorn in his side? God allowed a tormenting spirit. Okay. David, he starts to get a bit of momentum, takes out Goliath. That's a pretty good story. We don't have time to talk about. But as David's popularity rises, so does Saul's sin. And then rather than resist God's appointment of David as the future king, Jonathan, who would be heir to the throne as Saul's son, loves David. And from the earliest point in time, basically relinquishes his throne to David by giving him his coat and giving him his sword and giving him his shield and basically saying, man, you're the man for the job and I love you. And they have this incredibly close relationship, which some would like to think that was a homosexual relationship. You might think I'm saying that flippantly. No, that is an idea promoted by a number of people these days, given a couple of the comments, but there is nothing to suggest, in my opinion, that these guys were gay or that they had a homosexual love affair or anything like that. But you will hear it if you read any further than your textbook. Now Saul repeatedly tries to kill David, and a lot of these stories are very popular, so we can sort of move through them. But we do see that there is there's an aspect of David's integrity that is revealed in that, despite gathering for himself a bunch of merry men, as it were, he had opportunities to kill Saul and he refused. Absolutely refused. And in fact, I think at the one of one of his men wanted to kill Saul, or didn't kill him, but made an attempt. Can't remember exactly what that is. We can just listen to it today. And David either put his man to death, or am I tripping here? Something like that. Again, it might be need to be fact checking me here. But anyway, David wasn't willing to take God's anointed's life. Now, Samuel dies. At this point, it's might be important again just to reiterate here. When Samuel dies, we move now finally from this time of the prophets leading Israel, given that even though Saul was the king, he was meant to be subject to Samuel. And Samuel was a prophet, he was a judge, he was a priest, but he wasn't a king. So now we're well and truly into this period that kicks off at about 1000 BC under Saul. Now, David, he is fearing for his life. He takes off to the Philistines of all places, which is just craziness. And you might remember the story there, like to avoid getting killed, he acted crazy. Remember that story? Like, okay, so again, we're not going to tell them. We've got 5 minutes. I just think it's amazing that King David at some point thought it was a good idea to let drool run all through his beard, and that happened. Like you think about that, it's like that happened one day, and it saved his life. So I don't know if you want to practice that, but it might save your life one day. I don't know. Okay. And what I also love, and I don't know why I love this. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. Some would probably say it's bad, but he became a mercenary. Like that was his job. He just became really good at killing people. King David, that was what he just was like, okay, well, if I can't live in Israel, I'm going to go hang out with the Philistines. I'll be covert. I'll tell the Philistines that I'm killing Judeans. But he didn't. Every time he'd take off to go and raid Judah, he'd go and take out some of Judah's enemies. And he'd go and then he'd plunder them. That was the man after God's own heart, the guy, the pinnacle, the apex of Jewish religious history and leadership, is a man who made his living by going into villages, killing all the men, taking all the plunder.
Sure.
Now, what does that reveal about the nature of God? Yeah, patient, can use any... Like, there's just no one that's not qualified to be used by God. No, now we've learned from David, for sure there are certain behaviours that he does that requires, being put on the bench for a bit. That can happen, especially once you've assumed a role of leadership. It's common, isn't it, when someone in a leadership role fully blows it. Like Bob Hawke. I love Bob Hawke. He's the man. Don't like the unions even a bit. And if you do, that's fine. But what I love about Hawke was he knew that to become Prime Minister was to lay your soul to bear. And if you don't get the dirt out on the table first, somebody else will put it out there. And so he wrote his little memoir before he got elected of how he was a rat bag and he was a scoundrel. And Australians were like, oh, this guy's top bloke. Let's get him in. And so people say, oh, Hawke was out cheating on his wife. They're like, well, what did you expect? He told us that's who he was. Now, again, I'm not commending that kind of behaviour at all. But what I love is the transparency. What I love is the willingness to just be able, this is who I am. I'm a messed up human being, and we all are to some degree. But had he behaved the way he did in his life before Prime Minister, when he was Prime Minister, he would have come under far more scrutiny. Now, I understand the whole divorce and adultery thing. We're living in a culture where we don't think that that's that bad, and so we can live with that. But if there are other things that he had done, he would have been held to higher account. And so when David did that as king, he was held to higher account. So I'm not by any means making an apologetic for poor behaviour. All right, final thing that I think is important to talk about, we've got 2 minutes to do it, so I'm really not going to get much time to do it, but is that because the Spirit had departed from Saul, he wanted to go out and fight the Philistines, and he didn't know whether or not God was going to give him the victory, because he had no access to God, right? Remember, he was just the king who was going to be subject to the prophet, who's now dead. And so he goes and finds a witch doctor or a spirit medium. And then the spirit medium goes and wakes up Samuel from the dead. Did you read that bit?
Yeah.
Was anyone a bit confused? Okay, well, whoever puts their hand up first to make a go at it is going to have the final say on it because we've got to go.
Samuel immediately was like, what are you doing? Sort of thing, like you're waking up. As if it was like, probably not a good thing.
Yeah. We're going to pick this up next
Did
week.
Samuel, or was it a deceiving spirit? Or?
I mean, what he said was right. It did happen.
Okay, so this is the question to research this week, I think, because we'll talk about this when we kick off next week. But was this Samuel? Can spirit mediums wake up the dead? Was this a deceiving spirit? Was this a hallucination?
Well,
Was this God?
I actually was a spirit medium.
Well, we'll look forward to hearing your opinion next week. Okay, I'm going to pray. You guys are going to go.